Yes.
Yes.
Recording
Okay.
started. Yeah.
So the Environmental Law and Science Advocacy Forum, or ELSAF, is a clinic launched exclusively by the Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability with the vision of tackling environmental issues through an environmental law and science interface. Here at ELSAF, we aim to bridge the gap between law and science through multidisciplinary programs that bring experts in the field of environmental law and science together in order to find solutions to complex environmental problems and engage in an effective manner in the policy cycle. Currently, there are many issues which are caused due to water pollution. For instance, 1.1 billion people lack access to water, and 2.7 billion people experience water scarcity at least once a month, as per WHO. By 2025, two-thirds of the world's population may face water shortages. Around 80% of India's water is severely polluted because people dump raw sewage, industrial effluent, hazardous waste, silt, and garbage into the country's rivers and lakes. However, although the issues posed by water crisis might be common knowledge, very little of us are aware of how to tackle these issues. The webinar, which features international experts in the fields of science, law, and social research, seeks to not only address the rising environmental issues faced by rivers, but through the course of this discussion, we aim to arrive at a solution for these issues through science, law, and governance. This webinar will begin with Professor Lai Lin Heng, who will give the welcome address. This will be followed by panelists who will present their paper. And finally, Dr. Govind Singh will lead the discussion part of the webinar. To ensure the webinar runs smoothly, I request all the viewers to put their questions down in the chat box. To begin the webinar, the welcome address will be delivered by Professor Lai Lin Heng. Apologies. So, our professor is an adjunct professor at the Law Faculty, National University of Singapore. She was Vice Dean and Director of the faculty's graduate program from 1995 to 1998, teaching courses on property law and environmental law. In the environment field, she's honorary advisor and former director of the Law Faculty's Asia Pacific Center for Environmental Law through 2013 to 2018. She was instrumental in crafting the NUS Multidisciplinary Masters in Environment Management program, which was launched in 2001 and has the collaboration of 9 faculties or schools in NUS. She's a member of the Board of Directors, WWF Singapore, and was honorary legal advisor to Singapore's oldest NGO, the Nature Society, for many years. She was a member of the Board of Governors, IUCN Academy of Environmental Law, and co-chair of its teaching and research community. Welcome, Professor. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Well, it's 6:30 in Singapore, so it's 4:30. No, it's much yeah, it's 4:30 in India. So I'm very, very honored and pleased to be asked to give this welcome address. And I'm especially interested in and impressed by the fact that the Jindal University has a School of Environment and Sustainability. I think multidisciplinary education is the way to go. And as has been mentioned, I was instrumental in starting a multidisciplinary program that involved initially 7 faculties, and later we pulled in another 2 when they were newly formed. So I can tell you more about it. I'll send the information to Tarini. But basically, we were inspired by Yale University's School of Environment. It used to be called the School of Forestry, but they actually have a multidisciplinary program called the Masters in Environmental Management. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because that's where I met Tarini. I was teaching a course there, and Tarini was doing a PhD at Pace Law School, which is the top university in the US and worldwide for environmental law. And that she came to give a presentation on India's environmental law. So it's all one big happy family, but we are facing a lot of challenges. And one of the big challenges, of course, is water. So I like the title Rivers for the Future. There are many, many pressing, challenging issues that we need to resolve. And at the end of this program, I've actually sent Tarini a short film that was just released today, in fact, by the IUCN Commission on Environmental Law. And it's on rivers and what we should do. For me, I just want to start by saying, as I have earlier emphasized, there's a need for multidisciplinary approaches. And law is just one of the many factors. You've heard of ISO 14000. It's an environmental management system. But I think that every country, every city, every village needs an environmental management system. And we need to explore what goes into this system, because laws are just there on paper. And as a very clear example, you can have the best pollution laws, but if you don't have the infrastructure to deal with the sources of the pollution, it's not going to help. The best laws will not help. So then the next question is, what infrastructure do you need to build? Modern sanitation, for example, okay, something to deal with the waste management, etc. And the next big question is, where's the money coming from? So that's the big issue too. And how do the institutions, the government institutions, work together? So these are some of the very obvious challenges that we need to look at. So I'll just stop here because I know that I have a lot to learn from the speakers. Okay, so go ahead, please.
Thank you so much, Professor. Now I'd like to invite the panelists to give their presentation. The first presentation will be delivered by Dr. Abhiroop Chaudhary on contaminants choking our water lifelines, consequences and solutions. Dr. Abhiroop Chaudhary is an associate professor and assistant dean of student affairs at Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability. He is the co-director of ELSAF. He has published more than 20 articles in peer-reviewed journals and edited book volumes in the last 5 years. He's involved with mangrove conservation initiatives at the Indian Sundarbans and has extensively researched on trace metal pollution at Subarneka River, Damodar River, Ganges Delta, Sukinda, India's largest chromamite mine, and Gulf of Kutch coastline. His primary research domains are climate change, ecology, coastal conservation planning, mangrove restoration, traditional knowledge, and environmental geochemistry. His doctoral research focused on environmental threats at Indian Sundarbans, the only abode of mangrove tigers. I'd like to invite Dr. Abhiroop Chaudhary to present his paper. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Adivika, for this wonderful introduction. So today I'm going to talk about contaminants that are choking our water lifelines, its consequences, and what would be the possible solution from a science perspective. So we can see that rivers play a very important role in shaping our civilization. Long back in the history, rivers are the place from where the human has started his journey, taking its baby step towards whatever we have achieved till date. So most of the population across the globe lives around the river basins or any freshwater body in the terrestrial freshwater bodies. So a statistic shows that 50% of world's population live closer than 3 kilometers to a surface freshwater body. But the question comes, what is the condition of this freshwater bodies till date? Now, what is happening to it? If we look into different river systems, every continent has some very important river systems that have a defining role in their history. In Africa, we have Nile, Congo Basin, Niger River, Orange River. In Europe, we have Rhine River system, Danube River system, Rhone River system. Asia has one of the greatest population in the globe, and most of this population is dispersed among its river valleys, Yangtze, Wangho, Ganges River system, and Indus River system. These river system, and in America, we have seen how the civilization has developed in the Mississippi Basin. So river plays a very important role in shaping our society, our understanding. But in recent way of development, whatever is going on right now is crunching this very important resource and very limiting resource at that, because fresh water is a very limiting resource. So there is a very interesting study by World Resource Institute that says that About 18 of the major river system across the globe is in acute stress. This water stress come from different issues. It is because of the baseline water stress coming from huge in taking out of fresh water from the system, annual vulnerability, because there is possibility of climate change in induction that is happening, and many of the perennial river may lose their water over the period of time. Seasonal variability is present in the river systems. Flood occurrence are increasing over the period of time. That is also one of the indicators of calculating this risk. And the drought is definitely something we all dread of, but it is one of the co-consequences of the climate change catastrophe that is going on right now. So all of this is impacting the river system across the globe. And along with that, another big problem that the rivers are facing across every country almost is the pollution. There is a huge instances of pollution that is happening almost in every river basin, be it seasonal or be it perennial. Both are, according to geological concepts, both river system are a little different. In case of a perennial river system, it has a perennial water source, mostly from the melting of the glaciers. In case of seasonal, it is mostly recharged by the monsoon or any rain system that is incident in that particular continent or particular region. But the problem is the same. That is huge dumping of different waste into the river system that is asphyxiating. This is a technical term for driving the oxygen out of the rivers, making the rivers not possible to be habitated by the aquatic creatures that is a part of the river ecosystem, and definitely killing the rivers up. And it has a huge consequences also in the human health aspect that we are going to cover just after this. So many sources are there from which the pollutants comes in. It can be sewage, it can be pathogenic inputs into the river system, it can be nutrient pollution. Sometimes people really neglect this, but most of the agricultural system that are along this river basin, they use fertilizers, and these fertilizers are actually artificial addition of different nutrients into the system that particular river is not capable of handling. So that is also coming out into the river system. Organic pollutants are there mostly in terms of the urban settlements. Huge municipal pollution comes up. Suspended matters are increasing. Inorganic pollutants, mostly the trace metals, they are also impacting the rivers. Radioactive pollutants sometimes comes in. Thermal water pollutants are there. E-waste and acid mine drainage also adds up to the pollution burden. So now the question comes that what is this pollution going to do to us? A very simple search. When I was preparing this slide, I searched this word river pollution in Google, and many images comes up. I just collated some of the images. We can see very extensively what pollution can lead down and what is the river pollution looks like. So dead fishes because of the asphyxiation, because whenever any additional chemical adds up into the river system, it depletes the oxygen in the river, that kills the aquatic bodies. There are lots of health hazards. One of these health hazards that has been shown here is arsenicosis, a disease that happens due to groundwater pollution due to arsenic, which is also a very carcinogenic heavy metalloid and trace element. We can see that the heavy pollution of petroleum and petroleum products are clogging the waterways, even the marine ecosystems up, and there is a huge influx of sewage and different effluent into the river system, almost turning it into a total garbage dump. I will take an example. I will going to present a case study which I have taken up when I was doing my PhD work. That in a very conserved ecosystem of Sundarban ecosystem, Sundarban ecosystem exists in the largest delta of the world, that is Ganges Brahmaputra Delta. This delta is known for its mangrove tigers and very unique mangrove habitat. So it is conserved by law. There is no industrial development in the area. So one of my focal research question is, even if it is conserved, even if there is no industry, is there pollution in there? So what I found out, there are pollution stresses because humans have to travel by different routes, and this adds up to the pollution. It is a part of the delta, meaning the the pollutants from the upper stream of the river always come downstream. So that is also get concentrated in the sediments of the delta, even though that whole ecosystem is technically conserved by different laws and jurisdictions. So we found huge level of trace metals. So trace metal are inorganic pollutants, which has a very deleterious role in both in destabilizing the aquatic ecosystem and also in human health. Trace metal comes in different types of trace metals are there. In here, we are dealing with nickel and cadmium. Cadmium is very similar to zinc. Zinc is something that we require as a micronutrient in human body. And so what happens, it replaces the zinc in the body, making it bioavailable or more biomagnified in the ecosystem. So we found out that if we can trace the ecotourism route in that particular region, if we trace this, we can easily see that is the main area where we also getting this high spike of different metal pollutants. So there is a possibility that due to the ecotourism and the different type of waste disposal that happen in the area, that may be adding up to this metal pollution, even though it is a conserved one. And another question that always comes up in the mind whenever we talk of water, that first thing comes up that, well, I drink very clean water, so that means I'm not exposed to pollutant. But that is a very wrong misunderstanding in terms of science perspective, because what happens, exposure to pollutant can happen in many dimensions. I have given an example. There is the fishermen and the tiger prawn seed collectors of Sundarbans. They used to work. They don't ingest that particular water from the river because it's salty, but they used to work in that. They used to come into the water in order to catch the fishes on different tiger prawn species. So in order to do that, they have to spend lots of time in the water. And if that water is laced with pollutants, they are getting exposed to that water to the dermal contacts. So that also shown that due to that contact also hazards and health risks can generate. So there are many processes by which the water pollution can impact the health. Another very interesting process that we have found out when we are working in that area, that many of the people in that region is dependent on traditional medicinal systems. Traditional medicines are the local plants that grow in the area and can be used for different purposes, particularly as a food adjunct and sometimes also as a medicinal supplement. So my main idea is to find out if that plant is growing in an area that is near to a polluted river source, what is happening. So what we find out is instead of helping the people to get healthy, actually these particular medicines are carrying huge amount of trace metal in them. So they are getting exposed to the trace metal without even knowing that this pollutant that started its journey from a river can end up into a plant that is being used as a medicine. So it has a very varied dimensions, where not only drinking water pollutant can impact human health in many dimensions and by different pathways, different exposure routes. So now we can try to understand how these different contaminants, when they enter into human body, what they actually does. So what it does, first of all, our body, human body, do not identify most of the time these particular metals as a foreign element. Why it don't happen? Because there are some metals that is required for our daily metabolism. For example, zinc. So for example, manganese. This is required for our daily metabolism. If some metal, trace metal pollutant, which is coming into the system and mimics this particular very important metal that is required by the body will not recognize it as an alien or external body. So what it will do, it is going to assimilate it into the cellular metabolism. And when it is get assimilated, immediately it started disrupting the cellular processes. So cellular processes mean how a cell functions. So when the cellular processes get hampered in the last of this domino effect process, it can mutate the genome in a cell and giving, and in a very bad situation, it can result in a deleterious cell mutations, which result in the immortal cell line, which is also known as the cancer cells. So many of these contaminants that ends up in the river system are also carcinogen, because they can induce cancer in the body. And most of this carcinogen comes from the waterborne sources. So this is one of the greatest uptake, that if it is not only a requirement from an environmental viewpoint that the river need to be cleaned, that it is also a requirement from the human health perspective, that if we want to have a good health and hygiene, definitely the water that we are exposed to, not only the water that we are drinking, need to be clean and devoid of this contaminants. And the problem with these contaminants, we cannot see them. They are totally dissolved in the water. We cannot see them, or how they are entering into the body, very difficult to trace. So what is the solution to this problem? And this problem is not only happening in a part of a only developing nation or a developed nation. Throughout the world, it's baffling and getting a huge problem due to this river pollution of any surface water and drinking water sources. So what can be possible solution? One of the solution can be stronger laws. The laws can be more strengthened. So in order to combat these pollution issues, international laws should be more strong in when we are talking about transboundary pollution matters, like some river that has been shared by two nations. If the pollution is happening in one nation, but that pollutants are going to be carried in the other parts of the river also, so that kind of laws need to be enacted. In long term, where the pollution is already been done, where already pollution has happened, we need to reclaim that place up. We have to clean that water, which is a very difficult work to do. There are many technologies in order to do that. One of the technologies is the bioremediation and phytoremediation processes, where biological bodies, mostly plant, they can soak out the metal and different trace metals from the system into their body. But all of these methods are still limited to the lab application. Very little practical application actually happens. So that needs to be done. And one of the most important consideration is any hazardous chemical should not enter into the aquatic system, because whatever the processes is, when the harm is done, it is always difficult to revert back. So the first thing that we can do, stop that element from entering into the aquatic ecosystem from the first place. That gives us into a other solutions of environmental impact assessment. When any industries or any settlement, any development project is happening, that should be very rigorous if it has any impact or foreseen impact on the river system or aquatic system, any freshwater system. So that needs to be very strict, and there should be a very clear environmental management plan of how to treat the pollutant before it enter into the river systems. Hydroelectric powers give us green energy, but the problem with this is it creates lots of damming of river in the source or in the mountainous region. So it's asphyxiated the water and also choked the water of its valuable water flow. We call it e-flow. This e-flow gets constricted. Without the e-flow, the river do not have the natural process of remediating the pollutants that are coming into it. So that needs to be controlled. The health of the people who are staying around this river, polluted river system, that need to be monitored, and effective helps need to be provided. An aquatic ecosystem need to be protected, and the role of persistent contaminants in the ecological functions and services need to be monitored, so that any kind of remediation system should be implemented before it is too late. So these are some of my very simple solutions that can address this globally challenging issue. With this, thank you.
Hello?
Yeah, you're audible.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was really insightful. So the second presentation will be delivered by Dr. Tarini Mehta on protecting our water future, socio-legal and governance perspectives. Dr. Tarini Mehta is an associate professor and assistant dean of student affairs at Jindal Global School of Environment and Sustainability. She's the co-director of LSAF. International and regional environmental and climate change law are her primary areas of research, and her book on environmental governance in the Himalayan region is soon to be published. She has also presented her research at a number of conferences and seminars in India, US, and Canada. In and In addition to her academic work, she has also conducted legal and social research for various organizations, including the UK Focal Point for the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, Indian Council for Enviro Legal Action, Lawyers Collective, and Society for Child Development. She's also spent time as a visiting scholar at the University of Columbia in the US and University of Pennsylvania to further her research. I'd like to invite her to present her paper. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Advika, for that generous introduction. And it's wonderful to be together on Earth Day and discussing these very important issues together. And we have people scholars from around the world who are here. So this is going to be an interesting synergy of discussing the kind of solutions that one can come up with dealing with these kinds of problems. And in regards to this, to continue on from Professor Chaudhary's very insightful presentation and the solutions which Professor Chaudhary highlighted. So let me pick up on the point regarding transboundary rivers. Now, the use and management of transboundary rivers raises a number of key issues. It is extremely important that these rivers be managed in a way that provides and ensures the water adequate e-flow and adequate quality of water for all the downstream nations, upstream nations, and all communities, and so on. And a central role is therefore played by equity in this regard. And indeed, when it comes to water management as a whole, equity plays a key role. Equity and reasonableness in the context of the use and sharing of transboundary rivers is a fundamental aspect of the customary national law position, as well as the treaty law requirements related with transboundary rivers. And the principle of equitable use is then further complemented by the principle of no harm, wherein there is a duty to prevent transboundary harm, which is in turn a complementing principle of the principle of sovereignty. So while each nation has a sovereign right to use their natural resources in the manner that they see fit, this sovereign right cannot infringe on the sovereign rights of other nations. So severely polluting transboundary resources, using them in a manner that limits the use downstream, falls within the category of actions that violate the principle of no harm and the principle of equitable use as well. Of course, the complications in terms of international law are that in terms of treaties, the countries concerned need to be a party to the treaty. And in terms of customary national law, then enforcement often becomes a challenge. And a case in point is India and China. Now, India and China are not party to the 1997 UN Watercourses Convention, nor are they party to the UNESCO Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Watercourses and International Lakes. So one therefore has to look to customary water law when one considers India and China and equitable use of the transboundary rivers that they share. Now, whether India and China would cooperate with each other on this basis is doubtful. Firstly, because of the fact that with regards to transboundary rivers, they tend to adopt a practice that is characterized by assertions of absolute sovereignty. So when it comes to India and China, cooperation over transboundary rivers becomes more motivated by political expediency than by legal commitment. However, getting these two countries to cooperate over transboundary rivers and indeed over transboundary natural resources as a whole is very important because they share a large part of the Himalayan region. And in terms of Asia's water future, the Himalayas play a key role. The Himalayas are the birthplace of the major rivers of Asia, Brahmaputra, Indus, Amu Darya, Yangtze, Mekong. These major rivers of Asia are born in the Himalayan region. They provide numerous ecological and cultural services. They support over 1.3 billion people that reside in their basins and more than 200 million people that live downstream. And this is why, because of these rivers, the region has been called the water tower of Asia. The Greater Himalayas also hold the largest mass of ice outside the polar regions. And climate change is causing a rapid reduction in the volume of Himalayan glaciers. Some of you might have read about this in the news. And at the present rate, a number of Himalayan glaciers spreading over 33,000 square kilometers could possibly disappear over the coming decades. And this will lead to major rivers that originate in the Himalayas becoming seasonal rivers, drying up, which will seriously impact the people residing in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, as well as those living downstream. Rising temperatures, loss of ice and snow will also impact the seasonality, the of water, the volume of water, and so on. The Himalayan region is, as all of you know, one of the most biodiverse regions in the world, and the aquatic biodiversity of the Himalayan freshwaters is also very unique, very diverse. There are over 300 species of fish in the Himalayan rivers. There are a number of endemic species in the rivers, which Himalayan rivers, for instance, the Brahmaputra and Ganga are home to endemic and endangered species, such as the Gangetic dolphin, the gharial, the golden mahasir. However, what is happening is that these the needs of the ecosystems, the requirements of the ecosystems in order to maintain them and preserve them is often not considered when planning development projects and so on. And this impacts the biodiversity of the region. And the development trajectory adopted by the Himalayan region and by the governments of the Himalayan countries is very telling in this regard. It reveals the approach that they have towards natural resources and sustainable development. Now, sustainable development requires holistic planning. Strategic impact assessments can help with this. Environmental impact assessments are a key element of this. For emerging South Asian economies, however, which are currently in a very intensive phase of development, they have high energy requirements to meet industrialization targets, infrastructure targets, and so on. Himalayan rivers are seen as a very valuable resource. And so what is happening in the Himalayan region is that because of this growing demand for energy to meet these economic goals and economic needs, the pressure on Himalayan rivers is intensifying. The Himalayan region has a hydropower potential of over 500 gigawatts. And it has been reported over the past some years in the news that India, China, Nepal, Pakistan, Bhutan, that they plan to build over 400 dams in the Himalayan region. Now, there are already these over 400 dams are already at different stages of planning and different stages of execution. And together, if all these projects actually are completed, the Himalayan region is going to have the largest rate of growth in hydropower development over the coming years. It's going to become one of the most highest dammed regions in the world. India plans to build about 292 dams in the Himalayas. This will double its current hydropower capacity and increase the contribution to the projected national energy needs. But again, if all these dams are constructed, it also means that the Indian Himalayas will have one of the highest average dam densities in the world. It will mean that there will be dams constructed in 28 of the 32 major river valleys. There would be basically one dam for about every 32 kilometers of river channel. Now, add to this the fact that each of India's neighbors is planning to build hydropower projects, and then you can begin to see the scale of the impact that this is going to have on the Himalayan region, which is an extremely sensitive, biodiverse region. China is planning to build about 100 dams, Nepal, Pakistan, all of this, the focus on hydropower development at the expense of environment and climate change concerns. Now, many of these dams will be some of the largest and tallest in the world, in fact, as well. And again, it will provide electricity, it will meet a lot of the energy requirements, but then it will also reduce the Himalayas to one of the most dammed regions in the world. Now, add to this picture the fact that China is planning to build again about 60 or more dams along the Mekong River, which originates in Tibet and flows through Southeast Asia. So now, with all this development activities, the upper reaches and the sources of these Himalayan rivers, which have till now remained untouched by development projects to a certain extent, because of these projects and this kind of scale of development that is being planned, there will be a permanent alteration of the environment, the ecology, the topography of the region. And this will impact the health and flow of rivers downstream. Thousands of villages will be submerged, places of spiritual importance will be destroyed, people will be displaced. And while the benefits will be reaped by urban centers far away from the mountains, the impacts and the adverse impacts will be felt by the rural communities. A large-scale displacement of these communities will also impact cultures, traditional cultures. Traditional communities will be forced to change their livelihoods, give up traditional lifestyles and cultural practices, which is a serious loss in terms of the rich cultural heritage of the Himalayan region. So this is some of the most harmful aspects of the current development agenda in the Himalayas. And this is not the only kind of development being planned. There is increasing tourism, there is increasing urbanization in the Himalayan region, and all being done in an unsustainable manner, in an unplanned manner. So together, this is the kind of direction and trajectory that governments in the Himalayan region are taking, a region which should in fact be considered to be, and large parts of which should in fact be considered to be no-go zones, because of the importance of the Himalayan region in terms of climate change, biodiversity, as a in terms of water security, as a water tower of Asia, and so on. Now, if we come back to dam construction, construction of a dam is not just the impact from the dam itself. It also requires large-scale infrastructure development involving various, buildings, storage structures, powerhouses, diversion tunnels, roads, transmission lines, and so on, which will need to be constructed. So there will be a lot of deforestation, land use change, and so on, which will take place, which is going to further impact the biodiversity as well as the hydrological flow and quality of the rivers. And research has come out. There's a lot of research on the impacts that this kind of hydrological development is having on the ecosystems in the Himalayan region. So, for instance, research from Nepal shows that a lot of the marine biodiversity, the fish, for instance, are being affected by the increasing number of hydropower projects. Now, together with these hydropower projects, for instance, there's, as I mentioned, other kinds of development plans, tourism, in the case of marine life, for instance, overfishing, detrimental fishing practices, road construction, increasing urbanization, and all being done in an unsustainable manner. So all this together is leading to a number of cumulative impacts, and which is going to further destroy the ecosystems and the environment of the Himalayan region. And all these ecosystems are interconnected. So activities in an upstream watershed will impact hydrological dynamics, not just locally, but also across the region, and also downstream because of the interconnectedness of Himalayan biomes and ecosystems and so on. So environmental changes in one area will have cascading and wide-ranging impacts in other parts of the region. And these wide-ranging and downstream impacts will be felt across not just the Himalayan countries, but across much of Asia, because of the importance of these Himalayan rivers for much of Asia, because of the role that the Himalayan region plays in terms of climate systems in Asia, as well as globally, and so on, maintenance of weather systems in Asia, and so on. So in that sense, the impacts are going to be much more far-reaching than even what one is imagining, or what the governments are portraying in various reports and so on. In addition, these projects are going to increase and cause an escalation in competition over water. Now, the water wars rhetoric has been in the news. It's quite commonly in the news in India, particularly with regards to the India-China issues with regards to dams and so on. This is the kind of crisis which one can see these countries moving towards as water shortages take place, as water e-flow reduces, as the volume of water flowing in these transboundary rivers reduces, the quality of the water reduces. So this is an extremely unwise development trajectory for the Himalayan region. And also, of course, it's an unwise development trajectory because this is a highly seismically active region. So in that sense, in terms of disasters, it also becomes extremely important that hydropower development and hydropower projects at this scale need to be rethought and need to be planned in a much more, in a manner that is in line with the topography, with the environment, and so forth. And now, as all this shows also, the carrying capacity of the Himalayan region needs to be taken into account. And this also is not being taken into account when these kinds of development plans are being encouraged and being pushed by the governments of these countries. So now, in this sense, the impact is going to be not just in terms of water security, but also in terms of climate change. Dams usually are considered to be a form of green energy, an alternative form of energy, which is preferable in the context of climate change, but this is not the case. These dams will also have an impact on climate change. Scientific research estimates that large dams in India are in fact responsible for about a fifth of the total global warming impact of the country. And they are in fact one of the key contributors to global warming. Methane emissions from India's dams are estimated to be 27.86% of the methane emissions from all the large dams of the world, which is more than the share of any country. So Brazil comes second with emissions of methane from Brazil's reservoirs being 18.13% of the global figure. And the huge impact that hydropower projects have on global warming have been highlighted by studies. There's a study conducted by the National Institute for Space Research in Brazil. And this study estimates these methane emissions from all these dams across the world. And in the study, it has not included emissions of nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide from large dams. Now, if these were included, then an even greater impact on global warming due to large dams would have become apparent. So from all these angles, one sees and it becomes evident that the development trajectory that is being adopted is a highly unsustainable development trajectory, even though the rhetoric is, sustainable development, and so on. Now, a sustainable development in the context of development, which should ensure the needs of current generations, but not also sacrifice the needs of future generations, and balance the environmental interests along with economic and social interests. So this form of development is not what one can see in the Himalayan region. And the Himalayan region is, in that sense, an example of what is being done across the country, across Asia, and in many countries around the world, which is why we have the kinds of crises we have in terms of rivers, in terms of water security, in terms of climate change, and so forth. Now, all these kinds of impacts and all these issues which are arising because of the way in which industrialization development is being pushed forward at the cost of the environment, this violates human rights as well. It violates the rights of future generations. Now, all human beings have certain basic needs. We need food, we need shelter, we need freedom from violent assault, and so forth. And all of these are necessary for survival and also for living a productive life of dignity. So therefore, there are several scholars who then link the life and the right to life and needs with human rights, the needs that each of us have with human rights, with the human rights framework, and needs with the right to life framework. And no right has as fundamental a role in meeting our most basic needs as the right to life, which is why the scholars and why internationally also there's this interconnection being formed between the right to life and other human rights, and the right to life and the basic needs that human beings have. And that is also why the UN Human Rights Committee has called the right to life the supreme right, a right that is basic to all human rights. And water is a basic need for survival. This has been recognized by the Supreme Court of India. And being such a fundamental need, the Supreme Court has declared that the right to life under Article 21 can only be protected, can only be met and guaranteed if access to water resources is ensured and if everyone can receive safe drinking water. Now, the importance of the right to water has been accepted in international law as well. It has been accepted in constitutions around the world. And in fact, in some constitutions, it is explicitly mentioned. So in the South African constitution, it is explicitly mentioned that everyone has the right to have access to sufficient food and water. The Uruguayan constitution also mentions access to drinking water and access to sanitation as constituting fundamental human rights. Now, this development trajectory that I have described, that Professor Chaudhary has described in his presentation, this kind of a development trajectory and the impacts in it are impacting drinking water for villagers in the Himalayan region. There are more drinking water shortages taking place than before in Himalayan villages, despite the fact that water schemes are implemented. And the reason for this is that basic water sources, including that of springs, natural springs, and so on, are getting depleted or are even vanishing altogether because of deforestation, because of construction, dumping of rubble, indiscriminate mining, sand mining, and so forth in the mountains, and the different various types of environmental degradation taking place. So in that sense, the impact of this environmental degradation is impacting the lives of the local communities in this region. It is impacting the lives of downstream communities. It is impacting the lives of people across the region. And it has impacts across generations as well. It has impacts on the future generations when you consider that this is the form of resources and the quality of resources that we are leaving for future generations. Now, the importance, therefore, of environment, of protecting the environment, the importance of it for people's lives, for protecting the right to life, and the right to life in the sense of a life of dignity, is the reason why the Indian Supreme Court has linked the right to life with the right to a clean environment in a number of cases. And this is also some of the very creative landmark jurisprudence that has come out of the Indian Supreme Court. And citizens having this right to clean water, having right to a clean environment, means that the state has a duty to ensure this, which means that pollution and depletion of water resources need to be controlled and they need to be regulated effectively. Now, this has a number of aspects. One aspect is planning. So at the planning stage itself, environmental impact assessments come in. Environmental impact assessments need to be conducted in a much more effective manner. The EIA framework in India is very badly implemented. There are a number of problems of bias, of false information, of downplaying of key information. So the case of the Nyamjangchu Dam in Arunachal Pradesh, where the EIA report failed to mention the presence of the sacred black-neck crane, which is a protected species under the Wildlife Protection Act. This kind of glaring gaps. And then the case went to the NGT. Local communities, particularly the local Buddhist community, protested against that because that species is sacred for them. And the NGT then stepped in and set aside the environmental clearance that had been based on this flawed EIA. So these are the kinds of glaring gaps and a number of gaps in the research and in the EIA reports that one finds across. And this has unfortunately become the norm across India, where EIAs tend to be done more as a formality. Public participation is not effectively conducted. The project proponent is the one who hires the EIA consultant, so this becomes a basis for bias. So a lot of problems in the procedures of the EIA framework, the way it is implemented in India. But EIA is an important tool to ensure that at the planning stage, environmental decision making is a key aspect of the planning in the country, that whenever a project is set up, there's clear, unbiased information regarding it, on the basis of which a decision can be taken regarding whether the project should be set up or not, if it should be set up, how it should be set up, what changes need to be put in place. The EIA report becomes the basis for the environmental management plan. So a poorly drafted EIA will mean that the environmental management plan will not be effective. So in that sense, then a number of other aspects then fail when the EIA report is not properly done, and when the EIA is just treated as a mere formality, not as a key aspect of decision making and environmental decision making and environmental democracy in the context of local communities being a part and having a say in that framework and in the EIA process and so on. So this planning stage needs to be strengthened, and then you have the operation stage. At the operation stage, again, environmental norms need to be better implemented, emissions norms need to be followed, sewage treatment plants need to be set up, and India has a number of laws in that sense when it comes to environmental protection. Those who violate them need to be fined sufficiently so that the law and breaking the law actually acts as a deterrent. They also need to be made responsible for restoring the damage. So this is where the polluter pays principle comes in. And the polluter pay principle stipulates that those causing the pollution need to pay for the pollution. They need to restore the damage. But again, now the polluter pays principle is being criticized as a pay and pollute principle. You know, it's lost that its power in that sense. And the increasing pollution level that were highlighted by Professor Chaudhary points to this. It points to the deficiency in the implementation of legal provisions and standards and safeguards. And the fact that all these programs for the control of water pollution are insufficient, that institutional arrangements are insufficient, and that basically there is a serious governance failure taking place. And this governance failure is a matter of deep concern when you consider the fact that India has 16% of the world's population, but only 4% of the world's freshwater resources. So depletion and pollution of the limited water resources is a serious issue. And it is also a mark of the abuse of power by government and lack of respect of duties of the government. So on the one hand, you have this serious governance failure taking place, which needs to be addressed at the planning stage, at operational stage, and so forth. You have courts which have been very active in India. You have the National Green Tribunal, which continues to be active. There are various controversial decisions by it, but it has played a key role in trying to implement and enforce environmental norms in the country. And some very interesting decisions have come out of Indian courts, which I will not go into a full examination of all of them, because when it comes to water and rivers, there's a whole host of cases. But of particular interest is case law relating to the rights of nature framework. Now, and in relation to the rights of nature framework, there are a number of cases around the world have arisen where nature is given rights, nature is given personhood with the aim of conservation of that natural resource. And the question that these cases are bringing up is that is the right of nature framework a way forward towards the kind of comprehensive change that is clearly needed to address these governance failures taking place around the world and in India. So in India, there was a landmark judgment delivered in 2017 where the High Court of Uttarakhand gave legal personhood to the Ganga and the Yamuna. The Ganga Basin is one of the most important river basins, and one of the most important rivers in India. Around 1 billion people reside in the Ganga Basin. It passes through about 30 major cities and towns, and it has also along its banks. The Ganga has some of the most largest industries, whether it be leather tanneries, whether it be thermal power plants and so forth. So it is also the recipient of a great deal of pollution from these urban centers and industrialized centers along its banks. And a lot of untreated municipal waste also goes into the Ganga. Sewage treatment plants being set up is one of the compliance failures and enforcement failures across the country. And that has led to an increasing level of pollution in the Ganga River. And so over the past few decades, you've had citizens going to court, going to the Supreme Court, going to the NGT, trying to enforce stronger laws and so forth, and ensure that these municipalities, these government bodies actually ensure that the laws are being implemented. When actually this is the job of the government bodies themselves, but you need the courts to step in and constantly also then monitor their judgments. So this is another sort of aspect of the Indian case law that has developed over the years. And then in regard to this, then the rights of nature framework was a further attempt by Indian courts to better enforce water conservation. Now the decision was stayed by the Supreme Court, but it raised several key issues, questions, debates, and so forth in the country. It was inspired by a landmark judgment that came out of New Zealand related with the Wanganui River, where legal rights were given to the Maori and indigenous group in relation to the Wanganui River, a river which they had a deep connection with over centuries. Now, when you transpose that into the Indian legal system, a problem that arises is that in the context of the Indian system, who will be the guardian of the river, of the Ganga, of the Yamuna? Who will act as the guardians? In the case of the Wanganui River, the Maoris were given that role. In the case of the Ganga and the Yamuna, the job of guardians was again given to the same government agencies who till now are not being able to, follow and enforce their duties and ensure that the river remains pristine and clean, and sewage treatment plants are set up and industries follow the norms and so forth. So considering this, are these same government agencies the right the right people to be given the role of guardianship in such a case? So that's one of the questions that this litigation has brought up. And also, of course, the question of standing, in which case Indian cases have a very liberal aspect when it comes to standing with regards to public interest litigation. The US courts also have a more sort of broader aspect and consideration of standing in terms of litigation related to the environment and so on. So again, the question that comes up is, what will legal personhood add to standing in terms of Indian law? What will it add in terms of the already heavily bureaucratic system related to all these rivers, which is not working? You have all these ministries, you have all these administrative bodies and so on, and clearly none of them are really being effective in enforcing the many laws that India has. So there's a clear governance breakdown and enforcement breakdown taking place. So adding another layer to that bureaucratic system, is that actually going to help? So these are the questions that comes up with this judgment. But then on the other hand, the rights of nature framework itself is a very strong sort of pathway forward because of the fact that it changes the position in terms of nature. Whereas in now we have a more anthropocentric view of nature, anthropocentric systems with regards to nature, and that is what inspires and motivates our governance systems. But through the rights of nature framework, we move towards an ecocentric approach, And this ecocentric approach could perhaps be the way forward, but it needs to be complemented with community involvement, which is what we also see in the case of the New Zealand decision with regards to the Whanganui River. So community involvement becomes very important. And in India, the local communities have played a key role when it comes to conservation, when it comes to rivers, when it comes to anti-dam movements. Indigenous communities are the ones who have for centuries been conserving a number of wilderness spaces in the country. So these communities, these local communities need to be at the forefront of environmental management. They need to be at the forefront of planning, and they can be through the EIA framework, and they should be through the ecocentric approach and the rights of nature approach as the jurisprudence develops in the country. And strengthening public participation, community involvement, and in the management of these natural resources is a very important aspect that needs to be developed in India, together with an ecocentric approach and an actual implementation of the principle of sustainable development, which keeps in mind the rights and needs of future generations, and which also keeps in mind and balances environmental interests with social interests and economic interests. So with that kind of a framework, one could see India moving forward towards better governance and better implementation of environmental norms with active involvement of local communities. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. So the final presentation will be delivered by Dr. Emily Galliard on what rights for future generation, what rights for rivers, time for legal interbreeding. Emily Galliard is an associate professor in private law and co-head of the risk division of the MRSH. She defended in 2008 a thesis entitled Future Generations in Private Law Towards a Law for Future Generations. For this book, she's been awarded a prize by the French Academy of Political and Moral Sciences in 2010. Her work highlights the emergence of a new temporal paradigm which renews the legal framework but also initiates a new logic. She strives for a revitalized juridical humanism which respects both humankind through time and space and all the living and supporting conditions for life. She mainly writes in philosophy, legal theory, international human rights law, and biolaw. She participated to the elaboration of a Universal Declaration of Rights of Humankind under the direction of Corinne Lepage for the President of the French Republic. I'd like to invite Dr. Emily Galliard to present her paper. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Hello to everybody. First of all, I would like to warmly thank Professor Tarini Mehta and Professor Abir Chowdhury for organizing this online event in collaboration with the Nomadic Chair for Peace on Earth Day, and for inviting me today to make a presentation. I do address my warm greetings to Professor Ling Heng, who I admire and who is a great source of inspiration. And I do address my respectful greetings to the students, to my colleagues from India, from the Environmental Law and Science Advocacy Forum, the OP Jindal Global University, and the Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability. So I'm Emily Galliard, I'm professor of International Environmental and Human Rights Law at Sciences Po Rennes, and I am the director of the Grad Master Legal Transitions and Future Generations at the campus of Sciences Po Rennes. So I think my students will be more than happy to meet your students. And I'm also the general coordinator of the Nomadic Chair for Peace, dedicated to peace with the earth. Tony Oposa is our leader, alongside Professor Robinson, who is our chair emeritus and also Professor Mehta's thesis supervisor. So it is a great pleasure to participate to this online event with a feeling of sharing the same inspiration of respect for the earth and being part of the same family of academics and linked with students. So today is Earth Day. Today we are gathering around the topic of rivers for the future and how can science and policy strengthen sustainability. So I dedicate my researches on the topics of law for future generations through various paths such as the recognition of human rights-based solution or the implementation of legal actions for future generations. In the Normandy Chair for Peace, we defend a holistic approach inspired and moved by complex thought. So first of all, shall define the terms of my presentation. So it can sound a little bit weird to talk about rights of future generations as long as they do not exist yet, so they cannot, from a classical, theoretical, legal point of view, have rights. And we can denounce the existence of a legal paradigm of reciprocity by virtue of the non-existence of future generations usually and automatically means the absence of recognition into the laws and the absence of rights. And these very questions of rights of future generation will have to be explained. And concerning the rivers, what or which rights might be questioned or recognized in order to protect this common patrimony, which has been in Europe for a long time, protected only by administrative laws or public policies. So I will first, in the first part, explore these two conceptual legal entries: transgenerational rights, transspecies rights, nature rights, as the illustration of the entry into a new legal era. And inspired by the researches imposed within the Normandy Chair for Peace, I would like to emphasize in the second part this very conviction that time has come to realize and to strengthen legal interbreeding by adopting complex thought and by strengthening a new way of thinking in law. So first part, the entry into a new era, the recognition of transgenerational rights, transspecies and nature rights. So first of all, I would like to emphasize on this entry into a new era. For some people, theologists, they say that this is the era of the Anthropocene. This is the tipping point. The very question of endangering the future is something totally new. Since the dawn of humankind, the future has naturally and obviously a future, and the future was by nature an open horizon. It is said that the very first picture of the Earth taken from space in 1972 by the NASA has spontaneously imposed at the global level a growing consciousness of the very vulnerability of our Earth. So pioneers have already opened the way. I just put some books here. For example, you have some pioneers who opened the way for thinking out of the box. And they wrote in the 80s, 70s, 80s, major articles or books denouncing transgenerational and transspecies effects and the long-term pollution of nature. For example, the Red Book of Günther Anders, who is a philosopher specialized in the nuclear threats, he said that nuclear technology introduces a breakthrough in the history of humankind because technology wins over the human morality. The nuclear technology changes the very foundation of our moral existence, and it introduces a Promethean gap between our actions and our imaginative capacities. The second book of Hans Jonas, who is a friend of Günther Anders, who is also a major philosopher when you want to talk about rights of future generations, but also nature rights. This famous philosopher said that the fundamental interest of nature, inseparable from the interests of man, should be excluded from the game of short-term decisions and be included as inalienable rules in the Constitution. So you can see that philosophers have emphasized on the fact that we entered in a new era where the future of the future is at stake, and that now the laws and constitutions has to integrate this very new goal. I've chosen also the book of Rachel Carson that you may all know, Silent Spring, in which she has emphasized on the fact that we were losing our biodiversity due to pesticides and all the effects of endocrine disruptors. Due to this book, we had for the prohibition of PCBs. Last but not least, I added the famous book of Professor Edith Brown-Weiss, who's the pioneer, major pioneer on law for future generations. And she has written a book entitled Justice for Future Generations, in which she said that this entry in a new era was calling for the recognition of new legal principle, new intergenerational legal principles. I will explain later that I prefer the adjective transgenerational legal principle. So for geologists, more and more geologists use the term of Anthropocene, which define this new geological era where the action of humans has achieved such a level that it can modify, disrupt the earth at a geologic scale. So pollution by pesticide, by radionuclides, by plastics can be new stratigraphic indicators, among others. And our colleague has already applied how these pollutions were occurring now on the rivers. So for Westerners, this new word, Anthropocene, marks an anthropological change of paradigm. For the very first time, the Westerners can mentally access to the possibility that the future can be put into danger. And this is the reality, this entry into a new reality, a new era. So we can realize that the future of the earth is at stake, the integrity of the environment, of plants and other species, livings and non-livings are in danger, and that at least everything sustaining life on earth is in danger. Land, air, and water, what attorney Oposa designs as the law of life. So, time has come also to recognize new rights, transgenerational, transspecies, and nature rights. There are different trends. There are 3 trends occurring now, and the Nomadic FOP specifically studies the transformation process of rights in order to protect the future of the future. So the first trend, I will explain each trend more specifically to the topic which interests us today as the protection of rivers in the long run. So concerning the very first trend, I hope that you can read my slide. It looks a little bit small. In my thesis, I pleaded for the recognition of 2 founding legal principles for a law defending future generations. First, the recognition of a temporal non-discrimination principle. To my point of view, sorry, there is Tarini who's sending a message. First, the recognition of a temporal non-discrimination principle, to my point of view, arguing that future generations do not exist and that they cannot have rights, even in the very context of transgenerational threats, leads to an abuse of powers of the livings upon the non-livings. And second, the recognition of a principle of dignity for future generations, which allows us to propose a transgenerational lecture of human rights. I'm going to give you some examples right away. So applied specifically to the protection of rivers, these can lead to direct links between the right to water as a transgenerational human right to safe and non-polluted water. It is also directly linked to the right to life, the right to live and consume safe water. We can also say that human babies have the right to be born without having residues of pesticides in our blood. You know that nowadays the babies who are born have more than 200 residues of pesticides in their blood. And this is directly linked with endocrine disruptors and many, many diseases. In France, in 2015, I was involved in a team under the leadership of Corinne Lepage, who is a former French environmental minister and a former EU deputy. And we wrote a universal declaration of rights, of duties of humankind, which recognized those founding principles and this very idea of rights for future generations, but also nature's rights. I will explain later. So the global trend of climate justice litigation confirms that there is a profound change of paradigm occurring nowadays. There is a new way of thinking environmental safety, and our common destiny now is growing worldwide. And I think definitely that for our students, it's very, very a specific era, and that in a sense, you are lucky because you have to strengthen this strong movement. It's a general and global wave of change of paradigm. For example, the right to health has to be transformed through the environmental paradigm. Our health has to be protected through the paradigm of sustainability, which means the need to devote the right to environmental health. And you can see that it's a total change of paradigm for all the sciences, even for medicine, for all sciences, not only in law. So the rivers can be polluted. We have already said that by endocrine disruptors, pesticides, radionuclides. In France, we had a disaster, and there is near a nuclear power plant plutonium, which lasts for millennia. So it's for, at a human scale, it's like eternity, vanishing forever. There are also pollution by heavy metals or persistent organic pollutants. Concerning the persistent organic pollutants, what is interesting is that some of them has just been put into the market by one stakeholder. So Corinne Lepage was thinking about taking a legal actions in order to depollute waters in France against this stakeholder for a persistent organic pollutant, which is very, very specific. Well, this cocktail of chemicals put durably in danger the very health of future generations of humans, non-humans, and all elements sustaining life, such as land and air and water. So you can see that we need also the recognition of transspecies rights in order to protect future generations. Sorry, there is a little mistake in my presentation. So it's directly linked to endocrine disruptors and all the pollution I have just mentioned. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that all living forms are directly at stake when we enter the transgenerational perspective of analysis. In France and in many rivers all around the world, the pollution of rivers profoundly disturb the integrity of fishes and many marine forms of life. There is a phenomenon of feminization of fishes, which is a direct and transgenerational threat to the prediction faculty of fishes. The pollution by plastic is a very difficult one because of the diffusion of mermaid tears or microplastics. So this very question of the possibility to protect the integrity of the non-human livings is really new also. There is a need for recognition of trans-species rights, and this is a new revolution for lawyers. And there is a strong trend occurring now with the recognition of animal sensitivity and, more specifically, what is called sense science. Nevertheless, we can now emphasize on the third trend, which is a holistic and systemic, which is the nature rights approach. So the nature rights approach with the trend of nature rights approach and protection of river. So let's just recall the general legal context. The 1972 landmark book of Christopher D. Stone, Should Trees Have Legal Standing? Law, Morality, and the Environment. Now we have the UN initiative, Harmony with Nature, which marks a cornerstone in the development of this new way of thinking, which we are celebrating today on Earth Day. So we have already said that there is a Earth jurisprudence which is growing worldwide. So you can see the 10th report of the Secretary General on Harmony with Nature, which has been published on July the 28th in 2020. And on last December, the 21st exactly, the UN General Assembly adopted the 12th resolution on harmony with nature, in which the Earth is analyzed through the lenses of the Mother Earth Initiative. So the NCP has presented a transposition of this conceptual entry, rights, nature rights, to the oceans, the protection of oceans during COP25 in Madrid, in order to propose a global governance of oceans through the idea of recognizing systemic rights to waters and to oceans. And the step is occurring worldwide with Earth jurisprudence and, as you know, the recognition of rivers as subject in law with rights. It was the case in New Zealand for the river Wanganui and in Colombia, and recently for the river Macpie in Canada. But I wanted to share with you what's happening in France. In France, we are at the very, very beginning of citizen initiatives which want and are asking for the recognition of rivers as subject in law. So I put on the slide La Loire bientôt dotée d'une personnalité juridique, which is a river in France, another one, Le Rhône. And it's very, very new. There is specific and landmark wetland, which is Camargue, which is also at stake now, and citizens want to protect Camargue, which is a very nice wetland by nature rights. But it's not in the French background, cultural background, nor legal background. So it's a very new experience, and we will have to see what happens in France métropolitaine, which is France without links abroad. So what can be said on this specific Earth Day? So the NCP, the Normandy Chair for Peace, is calling for legal interbreeding in respect and with the spirit of the UN initiative on harmony with nature. So time has come for legal interbreeding. I would like just to go very quickly on this in order to respect the time I have. The interbreeding has roots by adopting complex thought. This is a whole course that is given to my students on Master 2 degree. So on the left side, you have the Red Book, which is from Edgar Morin. In France, this is the famous and landmark author, thinker about complexity thought. And to be sure that I can send an article in English to the students, Tarini, to be short, complex thought makes it possible to hold at the same time different paradigms. For instance, I have explained 3 trends. In a simplifying way of thinking, it's one or the other or the third one. With complex thought, you can hold the 3 without contradiction. So this is very theoretical. I won't take it too long, but it has inspired. You can see the title of an article. I can send it to you, which is entitled Avoiding the Tragedy of Human Rights, How Complex Thoughts can open the way to recognizing human rights for future generations. It's published in the book Human Rights and Sustainability. So, and this expression of tragedy of human rights comes from a concrete infringement of rights of a river, which is the Niger Delta. Amnesty International wrote a report denouncing the tragedy of human rights because in the Niger Delta, there is more than 50 years of pollution by petroleum. So just to finish, in order to respect the time that I have, I would like to plead for an interbreeding, a legal interbreeding, by adopting new way of reasoning, new logics into the law. So I have chosen a picture of corgis. The NCP was a part of a UNESCO delegation in Colombia last February with Professor Victor Tafou, who you know. And we met corgis over there, many chief corgis. And they explained to us their presentation and the links between them with the earth, with the Sierra Nevada, and how rivers play an important role. And to be very short, because it's we met an anthropologist, I don't know how you say in English, anthropologist, who explained to us that it was like energy points. If you cut the river, if you disturb the river at a level, it can also disturb, of course, after, but before. And this is totally new for Occidental people, Westerners. And, you know, some people invited corgis in France, nearby Lyon, and they have done something very, very interesting. The corgis have a knowledge, ancestral knowledge, by observing the rivers. And they went over there and they met Westerner scientists for several weeks. And it was amazing to see that their observation were really corresponding to the conclusion of the Westerner scientists. But for the Westerner scientists, it took years to have this conclusion. So it was very, very interesting to see how, by taking into account ancestral knowledges, you can enhance the protection of rivers. So the strong interconnection of rivers, forests, etc., is very inspiring. And the Normandy Chair for Peace decided to organize intergenerational dialogues with indigenous people and indigenous leaders. And I took the example of the latest one, which was with people from New Caledonia. And it was really, really inspiring, and we are more and more inspiring. So this is a research I'm doing now. And the person explained to us that as indigenous people in New Caledonia, they have a strong link with the cosmos, but it's rather more true for their grandparents. But they have this strong recognition towards the earth, the ocean, the rivers, that it nourished the past generation, that it's nourishing them, and they have this strong link of responsibility towards future generations. So time has come to create this legal interbreeding, and this is what we are going to do, to try to write on that on the NCP by creating also educational kits in order to explain to French people, because we are not educated for that, how to build peace with the earth, with rivers, with oceans, by taking inspiration also from New Caledonia, Guyana, and other countries. Last but not least, just to finish on a very concrete proposal, because Tarini, you talk about the effectiveness of environmental law. There is also a line of research which is held by Professor Michel Prieur on legal indicators. So if we want, at the global scale, from the global scale to the very local scale, together to turn the protection of the environment, of rivers, into effectiveness, then we have to create legal indicators, which would be the measure to compare the protection in foreign countries and in our countries. So I think I have a little bit too much talked, 5 minutes more. And thank you very much for, yes, sorry. I forgot some of things that are happening now. So I would like to say hello to my colleague, Victor David, who is online. He's from Antilles. And just to show you some latest news. So in New Caledonia, for instance, nature could be recognized as subject in law, because over there, the Kanak has a strong link with nature. and that's it. I have several, but we can say that I have done my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. So just a last word, which is the one chosen by Tonio Posa. We will have peace on earth when we will have peace with the earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Emily, for this great presentation. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Govind Singh to begin with the discussion part of the webinar. Dr. Govind Singh is an Associate Professor of Environmental Studies and the Assistant Dean of Academic Affairs at Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability. Professor Singh completed his Master's and PhD in Environmental Studies from the University of Delhi. His PhD research explored the relationship between urbanization, rivers, and groundwater, with Delhi as a case study. He has also been associated with the Ministry of Power, Government of India, recognized Research and Development Center for conducting EIA studies of river valley projects in the Himalayas, and with the Department of Biotechnology, sponsored ecological restoration project in the mining belt of India. Along with his academic commitments, Professor Singh is associated with more than a dozen grassroots NGOs and is well known for initiating the youth climate movement in India and the UN-endorsed Delhi Greens Block project. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Advika, and good evening to all of you, and wish you a very happy Earth Day. We've heard some very interesting presentations. We've heard some very interesting deliberations on the topic of environment, on the topic of rivers, and what needs to be done to sustain them for future generations, but also to remove them of pollution for the present generations as well. I'd like to begin by thanking Professor Emily and the Normandy Piece of Chair for agreeing to be part of this panel discussion and kind of giving us the time and the energy, I would say, and the knowledge in sharing and celebrating the Earth Day on this particular day. A lot of things to say, a lot of things we learned, some new things for me as well. I've taken some notes, which is very interesting. Some things that I'd like to see clarification on. I'm sure everybody else does too. So I'll request all the participants, who are listed here, I can see some 35 plus here, plus I'm sure many more, to put their questions in the chat box so we can take them up one by one. We will have time for a few questions. But before that, let me quickly ask or put forward my own questions, my own concerns, my own ideas that came mainly from listening to all of you. So we can kind of begin the discussion process. So Earth Day, a very interesting day, definitely. But Earth Day 2021, unfortunately, has come on a day when the Earth and planet Earth is in peril. Right, and the first thing that comes to our mind when we talk about planet Earth now and what's happening to the Earth system is climate change. And in fact, this phrase climate change itself has become quite old in that sense that we have now shifted from climate change to climate emergency. So it's no longer about discussing and researching about what could happen in the future. It's now about what's happening right now. So we've reached that stage where the impacts of climate change that we were told will happen, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, they're now happening, right? So change has happened a little too fast. And that is one big concern, a big challenge that planet Earth, I would say, is facing. And all the sons and daughters of planet Earth are facing, all of us are facing, all the other species are facing. And that's something that we need to discuss and think about. Why I talk about climate change? Because we know, and this is something that has been known for quite some time, that the impacts of climate change are first and foremost, and most importantly and most prominently, are going to be shown through water and through rivers, right? So the movement of water on the planet is the largest movement of any matter on the planet. And therefore, when the climate system has been disturbed by us, this hydrological cycle is now going haywire. And we are now looking at and preparing for floods, droughts, often at the same place, right? So the same place is facing alternate cycles of floods and droughts. This is what's happened with respect to climate change. This is what's happened with respect to not able to understand our climate system, not able to understand our own impact on the environment, and to some extent, not able to understand what rivers are and how we should manage them. So that's one kind of key perilous situation that the planet is in right now on this planetary Earth Day, I would say. A second concern that we cannot not talk about is that of COVID-19. And we know that even right now, I mean, it's kind of almost erupted in India. It's the numbers are going up. It's a big concern, and it's also not something which is not linked to water resources, right? Because it's a very ironical situation where for a long time we've urged people around the country to conserve water, to do whatever it takes to save water while brushing, while doing whatever. But at the same time, now a person who was earlier washing hands for maybe 3 or 4 times a day, 5 times a day, is now washing hands for at least 30 to 40 times a day, right? And you have to wash hands with water. So you can imagine the kind of impact this has happened on the global water resources. You can imagine the kind of impact this has happened on municipal water supply systems in cities around the country and the world. So two challenges we're facing right now. They look separate, but in terms of water resources, we can actually link them together because they are both posing a great challenge to our water resources and how we kind of balance them, how we kind of handle them. So that's something I thought I'll put it out there. That's what's happened. Something else that's also new on this Earth Day 2021 is the fact that we now have a helicopter called Ingenuity, which is on planet Mars, and it's flown, it's kind of taken flight. So we know that it's a successful flight that it's taken. And for the first time, we have a perspective of planet Earth from a different planet in a very interesting way. Right? We've seen Earth from the space earlier, but now it's even more interesting, right? So because we can do things on other planets as well. In fact, a term that I recently came across that I found very interesting was called Marsquakes. So we've all heard of earthquakes. Now we also are monitoring and kind of understanding what Marsquakes are. So the reason why I bring this up is because this recent expedition to Mars that is taking place is for also searching for life. And how do we search for life? We are searching for life by looking for water. So we're not looking for life. We're not looking for cells or, for that matter, organic matter. We are actually looking for water. We're actually looking for any trace of a small river or a paleo channel that we can find out, because that would indicate that there is life on planet Mars. Now, this is very interesting because what we're essentially saying is that we human beings understand that water means life, right? So we are clear about that. There is absolutely no problems in understanding that. But the bigger question there is, despite having this understanding, why are we still so callous in terms of managing our water resources? Why is it that rivers are still not given the kind of status that they deserve? Because they're actually the circulatory system of planet Earth. And if rivers don't function well, if we pollute them, if we put poison in them, then eventually we're actually poisoning our own bodies, our own selves. So that's a very kind of basic understanding that we humans have. But the bigger question remains that why are we therefore and then not acting on this knowledge, right? So I think I'd like to begin the discussion with asking this just one question, but in a different way to all the three panelists here. On any other day, I think this question would not have been pardoned, but today is Earth Day, so I think I can ask this question to all of you, which is a very basic question that I'd like to ask. I think I'll begin with Professor Abhirup, who made an excellent presentation on rivers, on pollution, on what's happening to River Ganga, and the huge issues revolving around all that. So again, a very basic, simple question that I'd like to pose is the fact that we know that water is an important resource. We know that despite this fact, we know that we have polluted our river systems, and a lot of these river systems that are polluted were actually listed in Asia. So that's another interesting aspect to note, because Asia is also the continent with the maximum population, right? So that kind of increases the threat in terms of polluting our river resources and what we are doing to it. So a simple question there, which is something that I get asked very often, and Professor Abhirup has spent considerable time on the field. He's got a very interesting and large experience of working in water resources. So a basic question, despite the fact that we have all this knowledge, all this scientific expertise in terms of managing water resources, monitoring pollution, and despite the fact that we have spent millions of rupees on cleaning our rivers, right? Be it River Yamuna in Delhi, be it River Ganges in the other part of the country, be it rivers in other countries as well. We've spent lots and lots of funds in cleaning them, in kind of ensuring that they have an interesting environmental flow and they work well. But despite this fact, we still have a problem, right? Those rivers still continue to flow as sewage systems. So where is this gap that we have? And I ask this question purely from a scientific perspective. So from your perspective, where do you think is the gap in terms of the fact that we are spending money on one side, but the rivers continue to flow in a polluted state?
A very interesting question, Professor Govind, and a very pertinent question also in view of both science and in the direction of water resource management. So this question is, as you have already mentioned, it is a very pertinent question. Always comes up that we are spending so much money in cleaning the system, but my answer comes that we are cleaning the river system, right? So it is like somebody is ill, they already got a disease, now they're expecting some kind of medication in a hospital. So whenever you land up in a hospital, generally the cost is more. The problem comes is when something is already damaged, it is always difficult to bring it back to its original position. First, this is the constraint. So whatever scientific methods we have till date, cleaning a whole river system is something that is not even economically feasible and not also scientifically possible, which is already been polluted to a certain extent. So generally nature do it itself. If a river is kept in its own course with its own flow of water and the pollution sources stop polluting, the river has the power to remediate some of our most of its pollution that is entering in its system. But the problem comes up, we spend money in cleaning, but we do nothing in stopping the pollution from the source. That is the main problem. If the pollution comes in, continuously keep on adding up into the river system, how much money we spend on making it healthy again, it makes not much change in the perspective, because we are adding also, we are not stop the adding of the pollutant in the river system. First problem. Next problem is we are expecting too much from our rivers. So it has given us life, it has given us livelihood. Many of the population that you have very ably mentioned, that most of the population resides along the river basins. But the problem is we need power from the river, so we have to build a dam there. Now it is going to choke the river from these essential water sources. We are going to use it as an effluent system. So all the industries again need to be built near the river system so that the effluents by any means will come up or end up in the rivers. So if this vicious cycle do not end, then we can have some 10th or 11th Ganges action plans, whatever the name may be, but the Ganges will keep on being the polluted, because the source is not stopping from the pollution from entering into the system, be it endocrine disruptors, be it trace metals, be it organic or inorganic pollutants, anything. So that needs to be managed. First, the industry should not pollute, and they should treat their waste before they're dumping it in the river system. Then only other scientific processes of remediation of already polluted land can come into place, and some really necessary change can be done. So that is my uptake from a scientific perspective to it.
All right, thank you. I think some very valid points made. The fact that pollution has to be stopped at the source, and that source could be a municipal waste that's coming in from cities. That source could be an industrial effluent that's being kind of put directly in a river system without being treating it first. So that's a relevant point. And I think from there we'll take on and we'll move on to Professor Tarini, who mentioned some very interesting and valid points. Something that I really something that moved me was the fact that we have actually shifted from polluters pays to pay and pollute. Right? And that is very concerning, because industry, like Professor Abhirup mentioned, needs to kind of treat its wastewater. But industry, it seems, has a way out in terms of paying to whoever, and then ensuring that the wastewater directly reaches or kind of directly enters the rivers without being treated first. So that's a concern. That's the source problem, definitely, that's been raised. But I'd like to go a little further north into the Himalayas to ask a slightly more, I would say, disturbing question, but also a question that needs to be asked and answered for everybody to kind of be aware of it, which is the fact that you mentioned that there is definitely something called right to life, which is extended to right to human beings' life, and how human being has a right to a clean environment as well. You also mentioned about the fact that there are EIAs in place, and often EIAs become faulty because they don't capture the true picture, and the true picture is therefore not reached to the policymaker or the decision maker, and therefore there are faulty decisions that are taken in the EIA process. So EIA is the process where human beings assess the environment. They bring out some interesting findings based on which we take decisions and decide to go ahead or not go ahead in terms of a development project. There's one recent episode or recent disaster that happened in Uttarakhand that you may be aware of, I'm sure. which is with respect to the Rishiganga project, which got washed away recently because of a landslide that took place in Uttarakhand and destroyed that project. And subsequently, further projects downstream were also impacted, and there was a huge hue and cry. Human life was lost. So, of course, environmental degradation happened, but also human life was lost in the process as well. So here is an example of not an EIA, which is written by human beings, but nature writing its own EIA and giving it to us, saying, look, constructing dams in that part of the world, of the country, is unsustainable. Right? It's something that should not be done, because landslides are going to happen there. They've happened in the past. They are going to happen again. Despite that fact, we noted that subsequently the other downstream projects that were stopped for some time after the disaster have now been given a green signal. So how do we go about working to fix the EIA process when nature comes to us and kind of submits an EIA report and says, look, this is what it is. We are not even listening to that. So any thoughts on that? Any suggestions on how we can work on that?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very important question. And improving EIAs, strengthening EIAs is actually one of the most important tools that we have in our hands to try to strengthen environmental governance and to try to strengthen environmental decision making. EIA is a very powerful tool in that regard because it allows and it enables and it encourages this kind of thinking within decision making regarding development projects. The problem when it comes to EIA implementation, if we're looking at India, and then this is of course a problem in several countries, particularly in Asia, is that first of all, EIAs tend to be treated more as just a formality that has to be done in order to get an environmental clearance, when that is not the point of the EIA. The point of an environmental impact assessment is that you do this assessment before a project is going to be set up, and you use the data that you get through the impact assessment, through a social impact assessment, through public participation and so on, to understand whether that project should be conducted or not. So the no project alternative is one of the aspects of an EIA. Then, of course, if you decide that the project should be set up, then the next question that comes up is that should it be set up with any changes? Should there be a change perhaps to the location? Should there be a change to the project design? What should those changes be? Then following that, then the next point becomes that then how do we mitigate the impacts that are going to be in that context? That an EIA should look at all the types of impacts that take place. So cumulative impacts, downstream impacts. It should look at impacts in the context of time periods, time scales, so not just impacts over the next 5 years, but over the next 10 years, 20 years, through operation stage, through the decommissioning stage of a project. It should look at impacts in the context of even down in terms of climate change, in terms of future generations, what will be the impact? Ideally, all these aspects of impacts of a project need to be considered. Indirect impacts also need to be considered. In social impacts need to be considered. And within these, then if one finds that there are certain impacts that are irreversible, then that's where the decision-making part of it comes. That should we go ahead with this project, considering that there are irreversible impacts, and then the impacts that can be reversed, to what extent can they be reversed or mitigated? That becomes something to consider. So an EIA is supposed to be a tool of decision making, but the way it is conducted in India is it's basically just a procedure. It's something which has to be done. The EIA reports are very faulty. I mean, there have been famous cases of EIA reports which are just literally copy paste from other EIA reports. So it's like there's cases where the public participation is badly done in India. But then you have cases where the public participation is actually done in a manner which is where the public and the members of the local community feel threatened and so on. So it doesn't lead to that important aspect of environmental impact assessments, where the public's view, the public's perceptions become a part of it. And within this, the entire bias stems from the fact that the project proponent is the one who is hiring the EIA consultant. So now the bias comes in because the industry that wants the project to be passed is the one who is hiring the consultant who is going to do the research and draft an EIA report. So here you have the first level of the bias. Then you have the fact that a lot of these hydropower projects are actually being pushed by the government. They're being, so you have cases where dams have the foundation stones for dams have been laid even before the environment clearance has come. So there's a huge push for these projects to go through, regardless of the fact that there might be severe environmental impacts that may be known, or that may even have been highlighted in the EIA report. And of course, you have EIA reports not even highlighting all the impacts. I mentioned the Nyamjangsu Dam and several cases like this, where key impacts have not even been mentioned and so on. So for instance, the recent EIA for the airport extension, the Rajaji National, of the notification of the Elephant Reserve and the extension of the Dehradun Airport. Now that EIA, it completely downplayed the wildlife presence in that area, and that's Rajaji National Park, which has tigers, which has elephants. These are protected species under Indian law, endangered species, and so on. And you have the EIA report basically mentioning that the presence of these animals in this particular area, which was to be denotified, was not noticed at that time. Those kinds of things, or there will be minimal impact, there will be negligible impact. So those kinds of ways to basically downplay. Now, of course, at the time when the EIA consultant team went to that part of the Rajaji National Park, they may not have seen elephants, but that doesn't mean that elephants are not going to come into that area. So, but then this is just a very common tactic used to ensure that the environmental clearance is given and key impacts are not given. So in that sense, there are a number of issues related. Of course, the law itself needs to be strengthened, but the law itself being strengthened is not going to be enough, because the implementation of the law itself is so flawed. So you need to be able to remove the bias inherent in the system. EIAs need to be made a part of the decision-making framework, and the bias element which comes from the project proponent hiring the EIA consultant needs to be removed. Plus, you need to have EIA consultants need to be actually well trained to conduct these EIAs, the EIA reports. Multidisciplinary teams who have the requisite qualifications need to do it. Again, this is another flaw. So those are some of the elements, procedural elements, which could in itself start to improve the system as it is currently in India.
May I just interject here?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think these are all very, very valid arguments. So I'm just sharing what I've learned, through my many years. And it's not from the Singapore system, because frankly, Singapore doesn't even have an EIA law. But, but what I want to say is some solutions. Number one, there's a clear, valid concern that, we have this saying in English, he who pays the piper calls the tune. So I think that's Tarini's point, right? The project proponent pays for the consultant. He appoints a consultant who'll say exactly what he wants to hear, But I know that in other systems, first of all, ideally, perhaps there should be a list of consultants that are reputable. And the government needs to look through this. I mean, you check their credentials, make sure that they are upright, etc. That's one way. So, so first of all, the choice of consultants is not entirely free. The project proponent cannot just choose his best friend. He has to choose from a list of approved consultants. The second suggestion would be, now, if the EIA shows a clear bias, or it is inadequate in some very obvious way, then I believe there are some places, I believe New York legislation has a solution here. If the EIA is unsatisfactory in a very, then what the government can do is compel the developer to pay for another EIA to be done. Okay, and then the consultant will be someone appointed by the government. So the nice question whether the government is clean here. I mean, they can, it can be a farce if the government is not upright. But this is a solution. If the first EIA is not good, do a second one, and make the project proponent pay for it. That would discourage it. Okay, and maybe we can fine tune this, maybe have the NGOs, for example, propose a consultant that sees it from the different perspective and make the developer pay. Okay, so those are my suggestions.
Yeah, that's important. Learning from best practices of other work.
So you also should.
Okay, we need
I
to
mean, want to say something.
mute that perhaps somehow.
Is there a question there that you'd like to ask? I don't think so.
Yes, this is Meg Ali from Nepal. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, I just did my eye surgery yesterday, so I don't look good in the picture. So probably I'll just put it off myself. Okay. So, yeah, I've been working with river conservation in Nepal for a long time. And by profession, I'm a river guide. And I have explored many rivers in Nepal and also internationally. So looking at our situation, so all this presentation was really good, very eye-opening. And yeah, so, so the presentation, we talked about just a moment. So about, the transboundary rivers. So, the presentation I saw about the Ganges, the pollution. So looking at our Himalayan rivers, each and every river flows to the Ganges. And pretty much, 70% of the Ganges of water, from Nepal. So if those rivers are not taken care in this country, in our Nepal, so how the Ganga can be clean? So I think in this front, so our Indian friends, us, as well as Bangladesh friends from Bangladesh, we all need to work together. We all need to really look into how we would like to see the Ganges, how we'd like to look at all rivers in Nepal. So at the moment, the politicians' dream, I'm talking about all politicians, probably politicians too. So, caching the water from Nepal going to the Ganges. So pretty much each and every rivers are proposed to be dammed, and they dream about selling the energy to India. So they've been living with this dream for many, many years now, So, and I would like to talk about a particular river since we don't have much time here. So I would like to talk about the Karnali. So if you look at, the Karnali, which becomes Ghagra in India, and in front of Ayodhya, it becomes Saryu and goes to the Ganges as Ghagra. So if you look at the source of this Karnali, you need to go all the way to Tibet in China. So around the Mount Kailash water state. So in the east of Mount Kailash, that's the Brahmaputra. And in the north, that's the Indus. And in the west, that's the Shatlas. And south is Karnali, known as Mapsa Khabad. So which comes from the peacock's mouth. The Brahmaputra comes from horse's mouth. The Shatlas comes from elephant's mouth, and the Indus from the lion's mouth. That's the say in Tibet, in Tibetan sort of a myth or culture. So what I'm talking about is other three rivers. So Indus, Brahmaputra, and Shatlas, they are very much exploited, or in the words of, big.
There's some technical issue I think has come up.
But I think we gathered his question well. He's trying to ask a question that what about the transboundary issues and with respect to water resource management, and how can people be involved with it? How can citizens, NGOs, civil society be involved with it? So I think Tarini can kind of maybe weigh in on that.
So I think civil society is and local communities are actually the only way that one can do conservation, and particularly in our countries where you have indigenous communities who have played a key role in conservation for centuries, where you have local communities who are in fact at the forefront of conservation when it comes to rivers, who are at the forefront of the anti-dam movement. So, for instance, the Himalayan region itself, which he was mentioning, and the rivers that he was talking about. So the dams in the upper reaches of Ganga were, for a brief period of time, the government imposed a moratorium on those dams for a few years, and that was because of the efforts of a well-known scientist, Dr. G.B. Agarwal, who was a scientist from IIT, and the movement that he developed around him, where basically they put through that movement, through the information that they put forward and the kind of, the public support for that movement, the government had to close down dams, Palamaneri and Lohari Nagpal and so on. Now again, that public support and that public movement has dwindled since Dr. Agarwal's passing. So the government is now going to restart a lot of those dams. But the local communities are the ones who can play a key role in this. And the local communities, interestingly, are the ones who have, even when it comes to the Chamoli disaster, again, there was a lawsuit in 2019 that was taken up by a person in the village Reni in Chamoli. In 2019, he filed a public interest case in a high court in Uttarakhand about the Rishi Ganga Power Project, saying that the Rishi Ganga Power Project was resorting to environmentally unsound practices and so on, endangering the wildlife and harming the ecosystem and the river ecology of the river and so on. So it is the local communities who are the ones who can do it and who have the luckily in the case of Nepal, in the case of India, environmental norms are strong. The courts are active in this regard. And so, local community, people from local communities can go file public interest litigations, go to the court, protest, public opinion, coming out through writing, through courts, and so on. So different forums are possible and are the only way forward.
I would like to put forward a very
valid
very
point. Thank you.
reality. So what has happened on the Karnali since this is the coming from Kailas all the way going to the Ganges. Please listen this. I really would like to request to the panelists to listen this. So before you get into the mute me. Okay. So what I'm saying is the Karnali, the last free-flowing river of Nepal. So where we have a GMR, so going to put a Upper Karnali Dam, right? So in Nepal, we have a capacity of more than 83,000 megawatt, which we never needed in this country. But if we all work together, if we're talking about the future generation, if we're talking about saving the rivers, if we're talking about saving this planet Earth, I think we'd rather be very serious, right? So if we're talking about Ganges, saving the Ganges, so how about, thinking of, 70% of the water coming from Nepal. So looking at how we all can work together to save some of our rivers. So that means helping, the Ganges, helping to save the Ganges as well. Okay. So, if we could leave this river free flowing, again, from the tributaries, we can generate, more than 7,000 megawatt. So, so we have been requesting to the government as well as the GMR, put off this dam on this main trunk of Karnali, which comes from Kailas. So, let this Karnali flow from Kailas to the Ganges. So by culture, by nature, by, civilization. So in every aspect, this river is so important, which is connecting the Tibet Plateau to the Himalayas, to the Mahabharat Range, Shivalik Hills, to the Gangetic Plain. So how we all can work together to save at least one pristine Himalayan rivers connecting to the Kailash, to the Ganges. So this is what I would like to put forward to this forum. So
I think that's
how
an
we work
interesting,
together. Thank you.
yeah, interesting thought there. I think very relevant as well. Something that we cannot it'll go beyond this forum right now if we take it up right away. But I'll request you to send us an email. I'll request Tarini and Abiru to organize that so we can note that and take it forward. That's definitely a relevant issue, no doubt about that.
Yeah. And I
So,
think we
yes,
have
I will-
Emily. We have Emily for only a couple of minutes more. So, if there are any questions for Emily,
Yeah, one quick
now.
question. Is she around, I hope?
I don't know if she's still there. She has an appointment at 6. 6 as in our time.
Professor Emily, can you hear us right now?
Maybe she's
I
not
can
there.
hear you. I can hear you. I just have a board meeting for my school because I'm director of international relationship.
All
So
right.
I have to jump into another board meeting, but I can quickly answer to a question if you want.
So a quick question that came to my mind listening to your presentation. I'm also getting feedback from many of the participants of different questions, but all linked to this aspect, that the fact that the world is now looking at water wars like situation. So we are now looking at a future where we could have wars on the issue of water. So I just wanted to have your quick thoughts on that how do you kind of see that happening and how do you what kind of suggestions do you have so we ensure that this is something that can be stopped? And at the same time, what kind of initiatives, if any, or if planned, does the Normandy Peace of Chair plan to take, because war is just quite opposite to peace. And I think that's something that definitely falls in your domain. So any proposals, any plans that are underway that you'd like to discuss?
So thank you very much for your questions. First of all, I shall emphasize on the fact that the Normandy Chair for Peace is really inclusive, so we would be delighted to go further with you and to organize other webinars. The very first publication is that book, Legal Actions for Future Generations. So I will send one book for you or 2 books in India. Tarini, give me your address and I will send for your school and for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We like the idea of strengthening peace with the earth. This is really the idea of Tony Oposa. So we have to think about environmental peace building. If you do not take care of the environment, at the end, you don't have any human rights. This is what I call the tragedy of human rights. And within the NCP, one line of research is specifically dedicated to indigenous leader meetings and this legal interbreeding. For instance, we have met indigenous leaders from Mexico who are part of a coalition, a civil coalition entitled Guardians for Nature. And they want to interlink the protection of rivers with the protection of forests and sacred sites. And this is something that Westerners do not take into account at all. So I would say that the NCP work will strengthen this legal interbreeding. So if you or your students would like to take part or be in focal point for legal interbreeding from your perspective in India, from your geographic zone, that would be marvelous. We do not have, we can do great things all together, but yes. I cannot do everything from France, but that would be great. If this idea of legal interbreeding sounds a bell for you or inspire you, well, that would be marvelous to do a partnership with your university and to organize and to cross analysis with our different culture. India has a strong culture. So that would be absolutely amazing to work together on that.
Yeah, I think, we should definitely take that forward and work with the LSAF and Normandy Chair for Peace and JSCS. We can work together, and that would be quite an amazing synergy for sure.
If I may, sorry. No, I just want to say something to thank Emily Gilad before she leaves.
So, I think let's do that together. I think that's all the time that we have for. So I'll just now pass on the stage to Professor Lin, and I'll request her to do a formal closing and give a vote of thanks.
Oh, okay. So we'll show the video later.
All right. Yes.
Because
we have
let me formalize the thank you first.
Yeah, let's do that. Then we'll show the video and we'll end with the video then.
Yes.
Yeah.
So first of all, I want to say thank you, especially to Emily and the Normandy Chair for Peace, because I think they are the thought leaders. And I give, credit to the organizers of this forum for bringing such a wonderful thought leader to this forum, because these are all pushing the boundaries for environmental law. And we need people like that. And I just love this name, the Chair for Peace, because this is what we need. We really need peace on Earth, and we should do away with the political boundaries, especially when we have rivers that are shared by different countries. Right? Nature knows no political boundaries. That's the whole point. And we need to have peace with nature, peace with the earth, because we are part of it. So thanks very much, Emily. And I'd like to thank the Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability, the Jindal Global University, and LSAF. And I must say, I'm very impressed by LSAF. That, again, is highly innovative, right? Structure for an advocacy forum. So this is the future. You are all young people. I have retired. That's why I'm an adjunct professor. But it warms my heart that the future is in good hands, that we have trained people like you to take over and bring it to a much higher sphere, because we only have one Earth. We must treasure it. And I treasure each and every one of you. And I value this meeting. I learned from you all. So if I can just give another 2 cents worth of solutions, okay? It's a very complex problem, right? And each country will have to find its solution, right? So I think one of the first way to start is to assess your water, etc. Where the sources of pollution are coming from, how bad it is, how to resolve this. And then it's a question, as I said earlier, of governance. You need to find the money to spend the money properly. But what is very important also, I think, which has not been mentioned earlier, is land use planning. That's very important. You just can't let factories sprout out wherever they want. No. It has to be organized very carefully. Certain areas, highly pollutive industries, you put them there so that you can control the pollution better. You see, so that's where planning law comes in, right? And the other thing is to clean up your rivers, etc. There are companies that do this for profit, including foreign companies, and you can get grants from the World Bank, etc. But whatever it is, there must be respect for the rule of law. Because when investors come to your country to clean up your water, for example, you can't do what I call a Hugo Chavez, Basically, after they've built the infrastructure for you, you say, thanks very much, now we'll take it over, and off you go. So it's a win-win thing. There's respect for the rule of law comes in, because when an investor comes in and spends money, it's an investment for him and it's an investment for your country. So that's where the rule of law comes in, right? And I'll just make one final point in terms of climate change. Because of climate change, we get floods. And at the same time, we get droughts, okay? So even for the developed countries who can well afford it, I find this is not done. And what is not done is when you get a lot of water, you should try and keep it. You don't let it flow off into the sea. You see, you need to build the infrastructure to keep it so you have a store of water. Of course, then when you have more water, you need a system where you can open up the gates and let the water free. But this again requires infrastructure. So I'll just tell you, very briefly, Singapore's position. Okay, in Singapore, we have water from 4 sources. 1, from nature, rain. 2, but that's not enough. We've been buying water from our neighbors, Malaysia. 3, that's not enough because at any time they can cut it off. They've got a contract, but there's a limited span. Okay, so 3, we invested in desalination. And 4, we invested in cleaning up wastewater. We call it new water. So this is a lot of money has gone into this, but Singapore, with good governance, has got the money. But what I wanted to say in relation to floods and droughts is that we used to just let our water flow off, you know. And I remember this before I even, got into environmental law. This was in the early 70s. Okay, we had visitors from Israel. And they asked us, we brought them around, they asked us, what are your problems? And we said, of course, our problem is water. We don't have enough. So what can we do? And the Israelis looked at us and said, you're a tropical country. What do you mean you don't have enough water? We in Israel have problems because we really don't have rain. But you get tropical rain, you get convectional rain. You should not let it flow off. You should keep it. You see, and then we started rethinking our infrastructure. So we invested in redoing our drainage system. So all our drains flow into the rivers, and we dam up the rivers. I mean, not for electric power, no. We just keep them as reservoirs. You see, so the British, when they left, they only gave us 3 reservoirs. Now we have 17. Okay, so this is just an example, because when I read Sydney, for example, I mean, they are well-to-do, but every year they have droughts and then they have floods. So I think we can learn from each other. So I'll just end here, and I wish you all the very best. Keep this going. It has been a privilege to be part of this wonderful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lin, for taking your time out and for being here with us, Professor Emily. All the different time zones and time differences is to manage to all come together, so that's wonderful. And all the solutions that you have shared with us, Professor Lin, the path forward that Emily has shared with the Normandy Chair for Peace. So I think together through this webinar itself, we'll be able to come up with some very interesting, innovative work, solutions, research, and dialogues, which we should definitely take forward and work together to, actually implement some of the solutions we've discussed. So this has been great. And thank you, Professor Singh. Thank you, Professor Chaudhary, for your presentations. And we have to conclude. We have a little video which Professor Lin actually came across today itself, and it's a little 4 minutes to 5 minute video, but we'll end with that, and then it's been wonderful. I don't want to say bye, but unfortunately the time is up.
Right. Bye-bye, everyone. Just do watch the video. I think it's good.
Yeah. I think so. Advika, you're going
Should
to
watch
stream
it.
the video now, right?
Right.
Yes, Professor, I'm just doing that.
Water is the lifeblood of human beings and all life on Earth. Aquatic ecosystems purify polluted water, shield coastlines, control erosion, and store carbon. People depend on clean water for drinking, cooking, cleaning, sanitation, growing food, fishing, and recreation. And yet over 2 billion people lack access to safely managed drinking water. Over 4 billion people lack access to safely managed sanitation. And 3/4 of all the natural disasters in the past 20 years were water related, including floods, landslides, and other extreme weather events. 80% of wastewater is discharged into the environment untreated, contaminating surface water, groundwater, and the oceans. Waterborne disease causes nearly 2 million preventable deaths worldwide annually, with the greatest burden falling on children under 5 years of age. Wildlife populations that depend on freshwater habitats have crashed by an average of 80% since 1970. Water pollution, water scarcity, water-related disasters, and damage to healthy freshwater ecosystems have major impacts on a wide range of human rights, including the rights to life, health, water, food, an adequate standard of living, development, culture, and the rights of the child. these impacts fall disproportionately upon those who are vulnerable or marginalized because of their age, gender, poverty, indigenous status, disabilities, and cultural or ethnic backgrounds. Although at risk, these communities have the potential to contribute to water solutions when empowered to do so. I would like to emphasize that safe, sufficient water and healthy aquatic ecosystems are substantive elements of the right to a healthy environment, as recognized by regional tribunals, national laws, and national jurisprudence. States should apply a rights-based approach in all aspects of allocating, managing, conserving, protecting, and restoring water. My report outlines 7 key steps that states should take to fulfill their human rights obligations. First, prepare a state of the water assessment, including information on water quality, sources of pollution, the water supply, water users, and impacts on human rights, human health, and ecosystem health. Second, conduct a legal mapping initiative to ensure that human rights are incorporated in water and wastewater laws, regulations, and policies, and ensure that human rights are prioritized in water allocation decisions. Third, develop or revise water-related plans to incorporate the rights-based approach. Fourth, implement and enforce water-related plans and laws, regulations, and standards. And fifth, evaluate progress and, where necessary, strengthen actions to ensure that human rights are fulfilled. 2 additional actions that must be taken at every step of the process are building human, financial, and institutional capacity, and informing and engaging the public, particularly women, youth, and other vulnerable and marginalized groups. Businesses are a major contributor to water pollution, water overuse, and the degradation of freshwater ecosystems. So they must do much more to respect human rights by reducing pollution, using water more efficiently, and avoiding activities that damage aquatic ecosystems. Sadly, people continue to be murdered, criminalized, and intimidated because of their courageous efforts to protect the environment and human rights. Individuals working to protect clean water are among the victims. States must do more to protect environmental human rights defenders. Water pollution, water scarcity, and water-related disasters are preventable problems. We know the solutions. A human rights perspective can serve as a catalyst for accelerated action to achieve safe and sufficient water, empower those working to protect and conserve water, and guide our actions towards a healthy and sustainable future.
Okay, great. So that was a wonderful video. Thank you very much, Professor Lin, for sharing that.
It's just an introduction to a report. And when I get the report, I'll send it to you all.
Oh, that would be
Okay?
great. That would be,
So just,
It's
yeah.
perfect. It just
Thank you.
encapsulates everything very nicely. So
Yes.
thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And it was wonderful collaborating with Normandy Jeff for Peace on this. It's always wonderful working together with Emily and NCP. It's like we're one big family.
Yes, indeed. I think we all are. All of us involved with the environment. It's one big family.
Yes.
Okay,
And
so keep
all
up the good work.
Yes. And see you all in soon, somewhere, another
let's hope.
webinar or in real life.
Yes. Let's hope life gets back to normal.
Yes.
Soon.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.